Hello and welcome back. I'm Professor Patel, and this is my talk on four figures of speech that we are going to be using when we analyze poetry, when we think about poetry. So I'll get right into it. Figures of speech are wordplay, if you really want to think about it. Humans play with words. Uh, we language is flexible and organic, and even the most illiterate human can be a master of metaphors and similes. So don't think these things are just the realm of English classes or reading Shakespeare or something like that. These are things that we use in our everyday lives. So the first one I'm going to start off with is the easiest one, and it's the simile. Oh, you might want to get out your notebooks, pause this video, and take some notes, get a pen. So the first one, as I said, is simile. Okay, simile is a figure of speech. It's a comparison, and it typically uses like or as in its comparison. So when Wordsworth says, I wandered lonely as a cloud, he's doing a comparison, right? That's a simile. He's comparing his lonely wandering to the lonely wandering of a cloud. That's simile. Very straightforward and easy. It's grammatical, and that's how it works. Now I'm going to talk about metaphor. Don't make the mistake if somebody asks you what a metaphor is by just using the simile definition and tweaking it a little bit because it doesn't work. I have students all the time say a metaphor is a comparison without using like or as. Now that's not really accurate. Okay, while there is a sort of a implied comparison, so the comparison is implicit. It's not direct. You want to be thinking of metaphor as a representation of one thing as something else. So instead of a comparison, it's more like a replacement. The speaker or the writer replaces one image with another when they use metaphor. Okay, so for instance, going back to the Wordsworth poem, towards the end of the poem, he says he says, they flash upon the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. Okay, the inward eye. Now, I don't think he's talking about some sort of eyeball we have inside of ourselves, right? The inward eye is a metaphor for memory and imagination. It's a different way of putting it, right? The inward eye. They flash upon the inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. Okay, so that inward eye is imagination. We use metaphor in everyday life. Lots of slang is metaphor. So we like replacing images uh, when we speak. We talk about, say, um, a person who is not a good man, maybe, or we say, God, he's a dog, right? Or well, we have all sorts of metaphors, and keep your eyes out for them. Remember, one thing replacing something else for effect. So we got metaphor and simile. Now we're going to do two of the hard ones. The first one is metonymy. Now that's a mouthful. Oh, you should have the literary lexicon, which is in pages, to look at these terms, see how they're spelled. Metonymy is it's what I call a restricted metaphor because it's a metaphor that works a particular sort of way. In metonymy, it's just like a metaphor. One image replaces another image, except for in this case, it's something closely associated with the original image. All right. So um, when we say something like the pen is mightier than the sword, we're really not talking about pens and swords, right? People hardly use swords anymore, and people probably don't hardly use pens anymore. What we are talking about is the pen is metonymy for reason, for discourse, right? For reasonable communication. That's the pen is representing those things because the pen is closely associated with those things. Writing is where serious communication takes place. And when we're talking about the sword, we're talking about violence, war, strife, all of those things, right? And so, what we're really saying when we say the pen is mightier than the sword is that reason, communication is a stronger force than violence, death, and destruction. Okay, whether it's true or not. All right, so that's metonymy, and there's we use metonymy in everyday life. It's there. I'd like you to try to think of some examples of metonymy. Remember, it's something that's closely associated with something else. Okay, so even when we say something like the White House responded to the Kremlin, we're not talking about two buildings talking. We're talking about the administration of the United States addressing the administration of Russia. And uh, the White House is closely associated with the president, metonymy. The Kremlin is closely associated with the Russian premier, metonymy. So keep your eyes out for it. In poetry, metonymy can be tricky, but remember something closely associated with the original image. In fact, uh, the last one is synecdoche. I used to think this word was pronounced Synechdoche, which it doesn't really. I didn't have anyone to tell me how it was pronounced. I probably read it before I heard it, but Synecdoche. That's not a lake in upstate New York. Okay, Synecdoche is another type of restricted metaphor, and it's one you're very familiar with. You may not know the name. Both of these you're familiar with. As far as Synecdoche goes, in this type of restricted metaphor, a part of something represents the whole. So once again, there's a replacement of images. Okay, the original image is replaced by something else. It's replaced by a part of the original. So when T.S. Eliot says, I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. What's he talking about there? I, I should have been a pair of ragged claws. He's talking about a lobster or something, or a crab, right? Some type of crustacean. And those claws represent the whole animal. That is synecdoche. Common uses of synecdoche are instances when, say, we say, all hands on deck, right? Or get your ass over here. Those are both, you can stop somebody and say, my good woman, do you know that you are employing synecdoche? Right? It's very natural to us. So in the first case, you say all hands on deck. We're not talking about cutting off our hands and throwing them on the deck or touching the deck with our hands. We are talking about crew members, right? Everybody has to come out for this. Those hands are attached to people, and that is synecdoche. Okay. The second one I used, get your ass over here, very common, and in that case, the ass is connected to the body. And it's just kind of like saying, get your whole person over here. Okay, so remember, simile, comparison using like or as. Metaphor, replacement of one image with another image. Metonymy, restricted metaphor, replacing one image with something closely associated with it. Not connected, closely associated. That's the difference between metonymy and our next one, synecdoche, replacement of an image by part of the image. So it's one of these things. It's got to be something that's attached, that is representing the whole, and that is synecdoche. Look at these terms for more examples in your literary lexicon, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.